Now, Australia's tourism industry has suffered enormously over the last 2 years. Of course, border closures, quarantine rules, isolation mandates have left many tourism operators in financial ruin. But today, as I just mentioned, marks a new horizon. After 704 days, the international border is finally open to overseas tourists. 50 flights have landed or are due to land in the next little while at least. And it's going to be a long road, though, to recovery for the industry. Felicia Mariani is the CEO of Victorian Tourism Industry Council. She joins me now live from Melbourne. Let's start with the good news, Felicia. You just must be so pleased to see those international flights coming into Sydney and Melbourne and bringing overseas tourists who are just so desperate to get here.
Yeah, that's very true, Chris. It's been a beautiful day. Watching a lot of the images at both Sydney and Melbourne airports today, the loved ones reconnecting after being so long apart. It's just been such a beautiful day. And it's really hard to fathom when you say 704 days, but that's actually what it's been.
Yeah, it's an important point to talk about those people meeting up at the airport because it's not just about dollars and cents. It's not just about an economy here. There's so much social cost in people not being able to travel. And I'll just have a look at some of the reactions at the airports today. Have a look at this.
We've been waiting for 2 years, and it took us 3 different flights that we had to miss with Qantas because we couldn't get an exemption for my wife, who is an American.
Where have you come from?
From Canada, Calgary.
And how long has it been?
2 years, 2 years, 4 months, and about 28 days.
And what brings you back to Australia?
Our daughter and two grandkids.
Very, very emotional, and especially that I made it for my sister's 80th birthday. Yes, it's been 2.5 very long years. I've missed her so much.
Fantastic. Coming back to see their grandchildren for the first time and all that sort of thing. But Felicia, they can't go to Western Australia. They can go to Victoria and New South Wales. The East Coast is okay for them. Are you worried about those internal borders still creating havoc for tourists?
Yeah, Chris, it's been one of the biggest challenges we've had right the way through this whole pandemic. And whether it was domestic border closures or now different rules state to state for international arrivals, the key thing that the industry has been crying out for the last 18 months really is consistency. That's really the most challenging issue that we've confronted. And as a consequence of the lack of consistency, it's also affected the confidence of consumers to book. And we saw that many times through the domestic issues over the last couple of years where people just kind of hunkered down in their own states. Our intrastate tourism in Victoria and in every state of the country has done extremely well. But, you know, capital cities like Melbourne and Sydney rely on international visitation. They rely on interstate visitation, and we haven't had any of that. And as a consequence, our capital cities have really, really struggled, more so than some of our regional areas, because they've had the benefit of people like us in Melbourne who can't wait to get out once, lockdowns ended, that we sort of, roared out into regional Victoria. But we didn't see the same happening in our capital cities, so it is a real struggle.
So how quickly do you think things will ramp up? How fast or slow will this recovery be as more and more tourists come in? Do you think they'll be reticent to come? And also, what problems does the domestic tourism sector face in terms of staffing and supply?
Yeah, that's a great big question you've asked there, Chris, and it does cover a lot of territory. I think first and foremost, what we have to realise is recovery is going to be 2 to 3 years, if not longer. There were some very early estimates that were done at the start of the pandemic, which were, best case scenario 3 years, worst case scenario 5 years. I think we can rightfully say that after the experience of the last 20 months, we're in the worst case scenario zone. So it probably is going to be 3, 4, 5 years before we really start to see figures that come back to what we had pre-pandemic. And looking at, if we just look at Victoria, in the last 2 years, we've wiped nearly $20 billion off of our visitor spend. Nationally, that figure's $140 billion. None of that is going to be recovered quickly. And when we look at our international markets, it's terrific to see that we've got, our visitors coming back to our shores. But the reality is as well, that will be a bit of a slow burn, if you will. We're not going to see, hundreds of thousands of people converging on our shores all of a sudden. It will take time for that recovery and as well the confidence of international visitors to venture outside of their own country. So we're looking at probably the international pieces at least a minimum of 2 years before we're going to start to get back to kind of those levels that we were pre-pandemic. Domestically, I'd hope to think that now we're starting to see a bit more sensibility being applied through most states. WA, unfortunately, is still somewhat of the outlier, if you will, but I think the rest of the states are starting to come together and starting to see the importance of the tourism industry's recovery being linked to consistency across all of the states.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think WA is very much the outlier. Everybody else, reluctant as they may have been, have come to grips with reality. I just want to finally get your thoughts on this. Consistency must be important because, as you say, people need to be able to plan and book in the medium term. You don't just book a flight to go overseas on a whim usually. Are you confident that that international border will stay open now? Are you confident that the government's given you that? Because the last thing surely that the Australian tourism industry needs is any more blockages, however short or temporary or restricted they are.
Yeah, Chris, I chuckle a little bit just because after what we've been through over the last 2 years, it's hard to feel 100% confident about anything these days. And I do talk about oftentimes that what the industry has is a sense of sort of cautious optimism. But, you know, we've seen so many times over the previous 20 months, the rug's been pulled out from under us just when we thought we were getting our feet back on the ground. So it is a challenge. We can only work with what's in front of us, and that's what we've learned to do. The biggest challenge, Chris, if I could say, and you touched on it a little bit a minute ago, the biggest issue for our industry is staffing and finding adequate staff to support the demand. In a way, it's kind of good that this demand will be a bit of a slow burn because we need to spend time getting those people back into our industry that over the last 2 years had to go work somewhere else because they needed to put food on the table and pay their bills and kids through school. We actually have to train up those staff. There's a lot of work that this industry has to do because many of these businesses have been shelved for the last 2 years.
Yep.
So it takes time to rebuild. And that's actually one of the biggest challenges I think confronting us right now.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us, Felicia, and good luck with it all.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having us.
Felicia Mariani there, who's the Victorian tourism industry